Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you're here, you're looking for that intellectual fuel, right, to really push your understanding of history, reform, and justice.
That's right.
Today, we're digging into a really crucial book, published way back over 150 years ago, but it's seen as, well, the blueprint for social revolution in modern India.
Absolutely. We are doing a deep dive into Gulamgiri, that's slavery, written by Mahatma Jyotirao Phule back in 1873.
Right.
And our source material, it doesn't just call it a book, it describes it as the first comprehensive social revolution manifesto written in Indian society. It's foundational.
And that's our mission today, right? To figure out why this text, Gulamgiri, is still so vital, why it keeps coming up in conversations about equality, education, social structures, even now.
It was a lightning rod then, and it really remains a touchstone.
Okay, let's unpack this before we dive into all the details. What was the really huge, revolutionary idea Phule was putting out there? Something that hadn't been said quite like that before?
Well, the core idea, the truly revolutionary bit, was defining the suffering of marginalized groups not as, just their fate, but as a systemic condition, an enforced servitude.
Okay.
Phule's main target, his central concept, was religious slavery. The analysis we looked at shows Gulamgiri was meant to be this direct, unflinching voice against centuries of exploitation, specifically against the Shudra and Atishudra classes.
Okay, we should probably pause there just for clarity for you listening. When we say Shudra and Atishudra classes, who exactly was Phule talking about? And why religious slavery? Why not just say economic oppression?
That distinction is really key. So the Shudras, traditionally, they were the laboring classes of farmers. The Atishudras were those considered, outside the main four-part Varna system.
Right.
What we'd recognize today as the historically marginalized Dalit communities. And Phule argued their subjugation wasn't just social or economic. He said it was actually sanctioned. It was perpetuated by misusing religious texts and authority.
So he called that Brahminical supremacy. Brahmana Shahi.
Exactly. He wasn't just critiquing the inequality itself, he was going after the spiritual and intellectual justifications for that inequality.
Got it.
His main goal was to take apart the Varna system by showing its philosophical underpinnings were, frankly, fraudulent. He argued these classes were trapped for thousands of years because religious texts were deliberately misinterpreted, wielded by the elite, essentially, to create mental and spiritual subjugation. A slavery of the mind, which is, much tougher to break free from than just physical chains.
And this is where it gets really interesting, globally interesting. Phule's vision wasn't just local. He connected it to the world stage.
Yeah.
We found this amazing detail right in the dedication of the book.
Yeah, that dedication is powerful.
He wrote, and this is a direct quote, "My grant is dedicated to the liberation of Negro slaves in America."
It's such a critical detail. It really establishes Phule's intellectual reach. It wasn't just a symbolic nod. It shows he was engaging with international anti-slavery movements. He saw the fight for justice in India as fundamentally linked to the abolitionist struggle in the U.S. Wow.
He connected caste oppression here with race-based oppression over there. It demonstrates this truly universal view of human dignity. It's quite remarkable for the time.
It totally reframes the book, doesn't it? From just a local critique to something more like a global manifesto for human rights. But okay, how did he actually structure these big, complex ideas? How did he make them accessible, especially in a society that was so layered and, largely non-literate?
He used a really clever structure. The book, Gulamgiri, it's set up as 16 distinct dialogues. So it doesn't read like some dry academic paper.
Right.
It's more like a living conversation. Often it uses this punchy question and answer format, almost like a courtroom drama or a political debate playing out on the page.
A debate on the page, I like that. Who are the characters in these dialogues? What do they sort of represent?
Well, the sources suggest Phule set up these dialogues very deliberately to make the case against injustice. You often have characters representing two sides. One might be, say, a farmer, a Shudra, asking these really sharp questions about why things are the way they are.
And the other character often represents the established elite, trying to defend the status quo, usually by quoting scriptures.
So the format itself was revolutionary.
Exactly, because it hammered home the idea that real freedom starts with having the courage to question injustice. It put critical thinking, that power, directly into the hands of the ordinary person reading it, or having it read to them.
Yeah, that makes the structure itself an act of empowerment. So let's get into the actual substance of those dialogues. What were the key historical and social arguments Phule was making? Our sources broke it down into about 5 main themes.
Right. So Phule started by giving this powerful historical narrative to explain the social structure he saw. The first big theme was his claim about how the Shudras were enslaved. He linked it to what he described as the historical Aryan invasion of India.
Okay, why was that claim linking social hierarchy to an ancient conquest, not some eternal religious rule? Why was that so explosive in 1873?
Because it completely changed the game about where social suffering came from. If the Varna system was some divine, unchangeable order, then resisting it was basically blasphemy.
Right, you couldn't question it.
Exactly. But if the hierarchy was the result of a historical event, a conquest, the Aryans subjugating the original inhabitants, the non-Aryans, who he identified as Shudras and Atishudras, then the whole system was political, not spiritual.
And therefore, it could be changed.
Precisely. It could be undone through political and social action. It redefined the oppressed not just as sufferers, but as the rightful original owners of the land who'd been systematically cheated out of their heritage.
That reframing is huge. It sets the stage for everything else. What themes came after that historical foundation?
Well, the next couple of themes zoom in on the specific tools used for control. Second, he painstakingly documented the social injustices carried out specifically in the name of religious texts. He argued these texts were like handcuffs for the mind.
Okay, the scriptures as tools of control.
Then third, he launched this really sharp critique of the existing education system. He argued that the elite-controlled education wasn't about enlightenment at all. It was designed to protect its own power, its own exploitative view, by denying real critical knowledge to the masses.
So the conquest set the stage. The scriptures and the limited education were the enforcement mechanisms day to day. And the last two themes, they look more towards, what, building a new society?
Exactly. Fourth, he really focused on the specific injustices faced by women, and he made female education absolutely central, non-negotiable. He argued no society could ever be truly free or uplifted if half its people were kept ignorant and subordinate.
Makes sense.
And fifth, he demanded a complete revaluation, a glorification of the working-class farmers, laborers, people involved in production. This directly challenged that traditional hierarchy that always put priests and rituals above physical work in creating things.
It sounds like he wasn't just pointing out problems. He was proposing a total flip, a complete inversion of cultural values, moving respect away from just ritual and birth status towards actual work and contribution.
Yes. And what's fascinating here is how he connects everything. He links all these societal problems back to that initial historical split he proposed, the Aryan versus non-Aryan divide. He argued that unless you address that foundational injustice, you can never really achieve genuine social harmony or equality.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem through Phule's eyes. Let's shift to the solutions, the how. Identifying injustice is one thing, but what concrete steps, what core principles did Gulamgiri offer for actually changing things?
His solutions were revolutionary because they were practical, and they formed this interconnected trilogy, really. First and foremost, education. He hammered this home. Education is the single most powerful tool for creating equality and fellowship. It was the key to self-respect, to self-awareness.
And how did he connect education specifically to dismantling that control through scriptures? Was it just about reading or something more?
Oh, it was much more than just literacy. It was fundamentally about critical thinking. That ties into his second principle, the need to attack the roots of slavery hidden within religious scriptures.
Right.
He knew reading alone wasn't enough. Education had to give the Shudras and Atishudras the ability to read those texts and critically challenge the interpretations that kept them down. Knowledge is power, sure, but skeptical knowledge, questioning knowledge that was liberation.
That leads right into his ideas about spirituality then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
His third solution was a radical redefinition of devotion, of bhakti. Traditionally, bhakti meant rituals, prayer, reverence to God. Phule argued no, true bhakti is human service, especially serving those who are suffering.
Oh.
It shifted the entire moral center from abstract rituals to concrete humanitarian action. Helping people is the highest form of devotion.
And his push for Stree Shiksha and women's empowerment through education that fits right into this vision of human service and lifting up the whole society.
It was completely central for him. You couldn't separate it. If you want society to progress, you must educate women, the mothers, the ones shaping the future generations. So that completes the picture. Education as the tool, critical thinking as the weapon, and human service as the moral guide.
Let's talk about how he delivered these messages, the style, the language. Our sources mention that Some people at the time found his language, well, aggressive.
Yeah, and that language was a very conscious political choice. He wrote in simple, everyday Marathi, the language spoken by ordinary people, not some high-flown Sanskritized style.
Accessible.
Very accessible. And he often used satire, sharp wit, humor even. Now, while the language was definitely intense, the analysis we have confirms this intensity was aimed squarely at the system, at injustice, at exploitation, not really at individuals per se. And maybe that intensity was needed to jolt a pretty complacent society awake.
Yeah, he wasn't aiming for just gentle tweaks around the edges. He wanted a fundamental shift in thinking among the very people who'd been deliberately shut out of intellectual conversations.
Exactly right. The fact that Gulamgiri was in the vernacular, speaking directly to the farmer, the laborer, the marginalized woman, that guaranteed its impact, both immediately and long-term. It didn't just critique. It laid the groundwork, the intellectual foundation, for huge movements that came later.
Like the Dalit movement.
The Dalit movement, absolutely. Farmer movements, the push for women's education, they all drew heavily from the ideas Phule laid out in Gulamgiri.
And the legacy, you can't argue with it. This book really became the intellectual starting point for later giants of Indian social reform. People like Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar,
Phule gave them that critical lens. The connections he drew, education, reframing social hierarchy as historical conquest, the absolute necessity of women's empowerment, all mapped out in Gulamgiri, became the bedrock. Later movements built upon that foundation.
So let's bring it forward. What does all this mean for us, for you listening today? Our sources call Gulamgiri a mirror of Indian society's self-reflection. It kind of forces you to look at where structural conflicts come from and maybe your own part in either questioning them or just letting them be.
Yeah, it's challenging. And if you want one single takeaway thought, one idea that sums up Phule's life work, it's his core belief, which is still incredibly relevant. As long as there is ignorance, there is slavery.
That really ties his whole vision together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Education brings the wisdom to defeat ignorance.
And only then can you truly overcome slavery, whether it's physical chains or, just as importantly, mental chains.
Right.
Our deep dive really concludes that real transformation needs what Phule called for.
Yeah.
A revolution of education and wisdom. And crucially, it needs the courage to question injustice. So we'll leave you with this final thought, something to mull over, based on Phule's concerns about new kinds of servitude popping up. What kind of societal ignorance today, the kind that maybe fuels economic inequality, social division, or mental limitations, what kind of ignorance needs the most powerful questioning, the most urgent educational revolution right now?
That's definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us into the incredible legacy of Gulamgiri. We hope this conversation leaves you, well, informed and maybe a little bit inspired.